Hey guys, how's it going? This is episode 7 of Startups. We are joined by our wonderful guest, Sam Seder, today. How are you doing today, Sam?
I'm doing well. How are you
Good to
guys?
hear.
How are you doing,
It's
Dan?
great. I had a long flight, been up for a while, but it's be good to be back home.
Before we jump into all the topics, obviously the Democratic debates happened last night. Do you have any quick thoughts about those?
I thought they were good. I mean, I enjoyed them. The big sort of, I think, headlines for me were Cory Booker decided to run in the left lane of the primaries, and Bill de Blasio has decided that he's going to wants to be part of either Warren or Bernie's administration. And I think, honestly, like Booker sort of made that calculation as well. People sort of divvied up as to where they were going to go. And I thought Castro, I thought was pretty good. Beto just collapsed like a house of cards, I thought. And everybody else, I think, it's interesting just to mark where the Democratic Party has come in a relatively short period of time. To the extent that the candidates reflect where the party is.
Yeah, I thought, especially compared to the last election cycle, although I guess we only really had, Hillary and O'Malley, I guess, to mark kind of where the candidates were aside from Bernie. It's interesting to see so many like very progressive people on stage now, talking about like trans issues for Cory Booker and everything.
If you go back before that, because Hillary came into 16, further to the left than I think she wanted to because of what happened during the primary.
Yeah.
And so if you go back to 08, it's crazy. It's crazy where, the major candidates are relative to where they were in 08.
Yeah, for sure. I think, or at least for me, a lot of the questions were how is the 2016 election cycle, like that year, how is that going to change politics going forward? And one of my big fears coming into this season, especially with Biden coming out and announcing his candidacy, was that things are going to kind of like go back to normal, that we were going to reset everything and then go back to, on the Democrat side, the more traditional Democrats and everything. So I'm happy to see that I guess the window is shifted to the left quite a bit in a lot of those conversations.
Yeah, I hope.
Yeah,
it's still possible Biden wins, but I think it's unlikely. But yes.
Oh, hopefully, we'll see how the debates go. Guys.
Interesting.
Okay, so without getting too, so we'll kind of talk politics here. Obviously, we have to, considering who's here. But kind of keeping things sort of business focused. How did the Majority Report start? I know that you did a podcast kind of recently where you talked about your area in traditional media and then kind of moving over to the Majority Report. Do you want to kind of summarize how you got that ball rolling?
Well, the show originally started on radio. Mm-hmm. The first Majority Report I did in 2003 in the run-up to the Iraq War. I was in straight entertainment at that point. And a buddy of mine had a show, Tom Sharpling, who does now the Best Show podcast, which used to be the Best Show on WFMU, which is a community station in New Jersey. And we had talked about how there was no left-wing mass media at all. And I said, I want to do, I want to do one of those type of things. And so I went over there for 2 hours one night with like a huge briefing book and had managed to book some guy from Fox and Friends on the weekend who had no idea what was going to happen. And John Benjamin came out, who is the voice of the Majority Report. He came out and did a live sort of like introduction to the show. And I had as a guest Janine Garofalo on the program because she had been doing a lot of stuff. Well, we were good friends, but she had been doing a lot of stuff about the war, and this was in February, so it was a month out from when we started the bombing of Iraq. And a year later, Janine called me and said, I've been offered a show on this network that's going to launch Air America. And she said, I told him I'd do it if you'd do it with me. And I said, I'll do it for, 6 months or something is what I probably anticipated in the run up to the election. So this was April 2004 or March 2004. And, I I just directed a show with Gary Busey and had written and directed a show that got bought by this small network called Trio, which is, ended up folding into Bravo at the time. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it for 6 months and then just go back into show business. I mean, I didn't perceive myself as leaving it really. I mean, I think I was probably writing a script at the time. And then over time, within 6 months, I was like, I like this. I'm going to stay in this. And I still was doing entertainment, but that was the Majority Report that we first did with Janine Garofalo. And then after a while, she sort of just didn't like the daily grind of it. And I sort of at that point had a child and had gotten married. And so I was like, yeah, it's okay. I have a place to go every day. And then I did a morning show, and I ended up doing one or two other shows for Air America. And then the last one I did was something called Break Room Live with Mark Maron, where we did a video show in the break room that was about 30 minutes long. It was great content, but the concept was, this is before YouTube had live streaming. I mean, this is before, we had to use, I can't even remember what it was that we were using at that point. It was, you needed like 14 different computers, and each one had to have one, component of software because they wouldn't play with each other. And then when that show ended and Air America went out of business, Maron launched WTF. And I was like, I was going to go back into show business, but there had been a writer's strike. And I was like, I might as well try and do a podcast. In fact, a fan of the show, of the original Majority Report, came up to me at Netroots Nation and said, you should do a podcast. And I'm like, yeah, but I like taking phone calls, and I wouldn't know how to, I can't do that. And it just sounds like a huge pain in the ass.
And this was, when was this? What year was this when you considered starting a podcast?
2010, early 2010, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe it was the summer of 2010 when he approached me and he's like, oh, I'll build it for you. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what do you mean you'll build it for me? And he goes, no, I'll build the a thing where you can take calls live. And I was like, okay. And he did, like a month later. And so I was like, all right, I guess I'll do this. And I had, a bunch of borrowed equipment from Air America that I still found, somehow got into my apartment. And I used that. And like, I had, the real thing was I had an email list from Air America that every time I was about to get fired, I'd have people email me. And then I would print the emails out and give them to the dum-dums who worked at Air America. And but I had an email list of about 20,000 people. And I think if I hadn't had that email list, I would not have been able to start the show. And, my model initially was fully membership. Like I knew, I had been talking to Maron and Brendan McDonald, and he was getting some donations, but they quickly were in an advertising model. And I knew that it would be the opposite for me because of the depth of the audience.
When you say membership based, do you mean like people were paying to listen? Like every person that was listening was like a subscriber or something, or?
Well, no, I launched and everybody could have access to it. And then I launched the membership, and I think around that time I basically said, okay, the last hour and a half you have to pay for.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I think a lot of people, I mean, at least the initial wave of people who became members, I think they did it just to support the show. I think if I had said, you don't get anything extra, they would have been fine. Because the depth of, I think like an audience that has known you for years, like they did on radio, and also who are interested in politics, the relationship is different than it would be if I was doing, I don't know, something on like here's a crazy story about this guy I met in Chicago.
Yeah.
So this was your first entrepreneurial thing that you did, or did you do something before that when you were working in media previously to this, where it was your own company? I was basically doing, my career was
I was basically basing it off of John Cassavetes, to be honest with you. I was making money as an actor in sitcoms, making a lot of money. And I was also writing scripts for sitcoms that I didn't particularly feel terribly emotionally invested in. And then I would take some of that money and make my own stuff. And so I had made a couple of movies, and that last show that I did for Trio was based on a movie I had done that nobody had seen. No one has still barely seen. But they licensed the movie, which was at that point almost 8 years old, and then a sequel to the movie that ended up being a 6-part miniseries. And so I guess I was entrepreneurial in that sense. And then actually in 2000, I had started a company with a couple other guys doing short in the first .com bubble, doing short like 20-second videos that were greeting cards that at that time. And this is before, I mean, there was no smartphones, right? Mm-hmm. And so like you would get it on a flip phone, and the quality was really poor. But we would do these short jokes that, I'm trying to remember like what the jokes were. I can't even remember. But it was like, we made like 40 or 50 of these things. And in fact, when I launched this show, one of the cameras I had was from that company that had gone out of business. It was,
sounds like Vine before Vine existed.
Oh yeah, no, there was nothing. There was no social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was no YouTube. There was no Facebook. I mean, Facebook I think existed.
I remember when MySpace started with it. You had MySpace and like LiveJournal and Zynga.
We had Angel Fire and Friendster and those things back then.
Yes, I think probably, and this is in the late 90s. So yeah, I mean they were there, but
way earlier. Okay, never mind.
You're on dial-up for the most part. Like I think they had rolled out some DSL and it wasn't ready yet. But the idea was that they were just going to put these on cell phones, and I mean I think I've been entrepreneurial to the extent that there are certain things I want to do, and I try. They're usually not necessarily commercially viable or commercially viable through like like a company, like an existing company, or I don't play well with bosses, and they come to me and they want me to do certain things. And I mean, as you get older, you're like, whatever. But I always had a problem with that, or at least I can always sort of say that I would say whatever. And then when I get into the situation, it gets a little bit less than whatever. But
when switching from doing like conventional media to moving to like the podcast format, what were like the biggest like positive and negative changes for you?
Well, I mean, to the extent that there was a big difference, it really had more to do with just the idea of like, I didn't want to be a businessman. I still don't. Like, I don't like the idea of being running my own business. I don't like business stuff. I get annoyed by it. Every time I, am not working, I feel like, oh, I'm stealing from myself in some way. Like I could be doing this. And, but, to the extent that I was in conventional media, it was not terribly conventional. There was just no liberal talk radio, and there was no liberal media. And, I'm using the word liberal broadly because at the time, if you said liberal, I would get callers on Air America who would call and go like, you just called yourself liberal. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's a liberal talk radio network. And now I think if you identify yourself as liberal, you're subject to critique from the left. But so to the extent that there was no left media. So everything that we were doing was unconventional anyways. Mm-hmm. And then just moving to this format, I mean, doing just a podcast as opposed to the video was pretty liberating insofar as like I could do that anywhere. And that was nice. Like, hey, I could take a trip with my kids and go into a quiet area and do the show from my computer. With the way that we do the video product now, I'm a little bit more constrained. But I don't know. I didn't feel like it was that big of a jump because I don't think I was doing anything different, frankly.
You never ran into issues on radio where, so not necessarily things like swearing, but like maybe there are some topics that you want to bring up or address in a certain way, and on radio you're a little bit more shackled? You didn't feel that much, or it just wasn't the
No,
stuff
I
you
didn't
talked
feel
about?
that at all. Because, I mean, part of it was I was making a lot more money in show business. I mean, I was making, I don't know that you can, for someone who was not successful, in the way that we perceive people in show business to be successful. I had done 10 pilots. I mean, the amount of money that I was getting per episode or the deals that I made was just absurd. And so throughout my radio career, when I had many people who wanted me to stop doing different things, I was like, fire me. I don't care. I'm going to go. If you fire me, you've just basically raised my income by 40, 60, 70, 80%. I mean, so there were times when people would say, like, you got to stop doing this. Like early on, I had on the show this guy, Michael Massey, who was with the Columbia Journalism Review, and he told Janine and I remember this very distinctly. He said, the media is influenced by the fact that the conservatives do a lot of postcard campaigns. And if you're a journalist and you get 3,000 letters saying, it's, this and that about your coverage, it's going to impact your coverage. And so I was like, okay. And there was a lot of controversy about this guy, Adam Nagorny, who was a political writer for the New York Times, and someone had written up a collection of his headlines. Granted, he may not have written those headlines, but nevertheless, they reflected his coverage. And they were all just sort of like skewed in a bizarre way. John Kerry's doing this wrong. If John Kerry wants to win, he's got to push his military service. Kerry's military service a problem. Like stuff like this. And you may be able to find it online. And so one night I was like, all right, let's call the New York Times Washington Bureau and tell them what they're doing is wrong. And apparently the next day, he had another reporter contact Air America and basically threaten our coverage. This is what I was told by an Air America executive. Now, that Air America executive I also don't have a huge faith in, but this is what he told me. The phone banks had been shut down. And this guy was like, you got to stop doing this. And I'm like, no. And he was like, you're acting like a child. And I said, I don't give a shit. Like, I literally was like, I don't care what you're saying to me. You want to fire me? Fire me. And he's like, well, you're going to get in trouble with the FCC. And I'm like, I don't think the FCC has a law against this.
Yeah.
And then he was like, well, you cannot say that number on air. And I said, all right. You just gave me a good reason as to why I'm not going to roll my blog into the Air America blog. We're going to put it on my blog, and I'm going to tell people to go to my blog and look at the number and then call it. And, so I didn't get along much with the people, but there wasn't a lot of instances where they listened to anything. And, at one point somebody had asked me if I thought that I got fired from one, because there was like 5 different regimes, if I had gotten fired from one, because of my stance on Israel. And to my knowledge, that was never the case. Nobody ever said anything to me. And it's possible people developed their sense of me based upon what I would say on air, but nobody ever came to me and said, you should maybe back off this or that. Because I was like happy to get fired. I was ambivalent about the whole thing to the extent that I was like, maybe I should go back into show business. I mean, there's no point in me. I guess my feeling was at the time was like, there's no point in me doing this if I can't do it the way I want to do it.
Sure.
Do you think it's possible to have a level of entrepreneurial control and still be in a traditional radio or media of television or movies, or do you think that in those formats you're always beholden to someone else at that level?
Well, I think I think it's going to change. I mean, I think I think it's going to change because the way that these companies are structured now, I think is unsustainable. I mean, my understanding is, Netflix and Amazon did not exist in the way that they existed back when I would do shows, and I would pitch shows and produce shows.
Mm-hmm.
And now my understanding is that there's far less development, there's far less notes in the development process. The process itself is less development oriented insofar as they don't have you do a pilot. They have you do like 8. And if the 8 catch on, then you're on. If the 8 don't catch on, they boot you immediately because they're, and that. So I think in that sense.
Wait, real quick. What do you mean by an 8? Like 8 full episodes or 8? Or is
yeah.
This, okay.
So it used to be you do a pilot,
mm-hmm.
and then they would, depending on what kind of network it was, they would go out and they would do Q test on it, and they would focus group it. And so you would you would go in, you'd pitch the show, unless you had an existing deal. You would pitch the show, they would buy it, then you would write half a dozen versions of the script, and you'd take their notes because that was what you're getting paid for. I could write the thing in a day, and then the notes were just ridiculous. And after a while, you learn how to deal with that. I would always throw a scene or two in that I was like, this is garbage. And hope that they would say, this scene does that seem weird to you? And you're like, you know what? You're right. I'm going to take that whole thing out. And so you could always address their notes. But
I never knew if this was real or not, but that reminds me a lot of the, when people would try to get stuff by the censors, they would include stuff that was obviously not good. And then they would remove that as a concession, but they would have other stuff that would slide through as a result of that. It kind of reminds me of that.
Well, I mean, that's the way you negotiate with anything, right?
Sure, yeah.
It's just that you have to realize at one point, this is a negotiation. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to put stuff in my ask that I'm willing to give up. And then it would be made into a pilot. And then they would debate about, and all the, where does it fit the schedule? How does it test? Et cetera, et cetera. And then if it got a pickup, you would get 9 episodes. And then they would decide later if there was but that whole process was, 1 out of 40 or 50 projects maybe made it to that 9th episode.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think it's you go in, you pitch a show, and they go, okay, we'll make 8. And they're going to make 8 for probably the cost of what 2 would have been back in the day. And if it does well, they keep it. If it doesn't, they just jettison it immediately. So
Sure.
it's a different model, and it's more entrepreneurial in that sense. There's a lot less development. Now, it's not entrepreneurial in the sense that you own your product, although I imagine more creators are owning more of their content as they go in, but there's a lot of other players, with agencies and packaging and whatnot. But my idea of what radio is going to look like anytime from it could happen tomorrow, I feel like, but over the next 5-10 years is going to be folks like you and I will produce our shows, and some radio network will pick them up and distribute them, and the revenue will be we'll figure out some type of revenue share, and that'll be it. And maybe there'll be FCC issues, or maybe not. I mean, at that point, FCC issues have been largely made irrelevant by cable, right?
Yeah.
Because cable's not subject to those same sort of restrictions as broadcast television, but nobody knows the difference between broadcast and cable anymore.
Or I was going to say real quick a couple things. I don't want to interrupt you before. This is kind of related, but what you said about the doing the mass call-ins, one thing that I've seen that has been consistently posted on the internet that not a lot of people seem to understand, and it sounds like you've got some firsthand experience with this, is if you're really trying to move like your local congressman or somebody on an issue, that the 2 things that work tremendously well that everybody discounts today are actually calling the office and writing letters. that like getting 100 letters at some congressman's office means more than like a 500,000 signature online petition. I've heard that a lot before, and it sounds like that call-in thing was like pressuring people to take notice as well.
Well, I worked on the Hill as a college student for a summer, years, 30, more than 30 years ago, I guess. It's a little terrifying, but, and they had a specific algorithm that each letter represented a certain number of people in their district. And I would imagine today, if the algorithm was every letter represents 200 people, I would say today it's probably every letter represents 500 people or 700 people, because people don't write letters as much. Yeah. And so the effort that you're right. The effort that is exerted definitely impacts their perception. I mean, look, net neutrality was reversed under the Obama administration because 3 million people, 1% of the country commented on this, and it just flipped it like that. I don't know if it works necessarily with every, it's a function of like what, who's in office.
And what is the issue and how hard is it to like actually get it changed? Yeah.
Yep.
You mentioned earlier about like radio, that you think the model going forward is radio picking up people from like online content. Has that happened yet? Are you aware of somebody that kind of like made a start? I know a lot of people from conventional media have come to like online media, but has anybody made that jump back from online media to having a radio show or anything?
Has anybody made the jump back as an individual show?
Or even like a kind of like a collective show?
Well, like Randy Rhodes, I know had gone from radio to podcast, and she just hopped back on radio in San Francisco. I don't know of any, and at one point I almost did that. In fact, I did sort of for a brief period of time about 4 years ago. But
any like endemic online content creators that have transitioned to traditional media with no presence there before? I mean, I think you've seen it in television, right? I mean, we've seen podcasters go. Those two guys from the Bronx have a show on Showtime. What's the name of their show? It escapes me at the moment. But they were online. Desis and Mero. I'm somebody. Just
yeah. I think so. Gotcha. And who else? Well, Pod Save America guys had a show on HBO.
Okay.
Bill Simmons, I think, probably is an example of that. I mean, it's happening, and certainly in the podcast world, they're developing podcasts that get turned into TV shows, like Homeland. Not Homeland, Homecoming.
Okay.
With Julia Roberts came from a podcast done by, I think, Gimlet, maybe. So, like there's so many different worlds within what we do, right? Like the idea of us doing a live, this thing that we're doing is different from a lot of it. You got the podcasts that are sort of like fully produced shows, that are the equivalent of an HBO show, but just audio only. In terms of what we do, like I'd say those two guys you mentioned and Pod Save America, similar. But
I'm interested in your outlook on radio in general. Now, I haven't looked into it too much, but my assumption would be that radio as a medium, I would feel like it was going down. And also I'd feel like the revenue source for radio in general, and I could be wrong by this, but I would say that's probably the least desirable media advertising opportunity that there is for most advertisers when you look at the outlooks. Do you think that's the case? Do you agree with that?
Well, I think all of what you're saying is, well, not as a medium, I would disagree, right? Because what we're doing is radio. I mean, more or less.
I'm talking more
I think
terrestrial,
it's like broadcast,
like
FCC,
FM, AM
like
radio,
as,
that type
as
of
an
thing.
industry, as an industry, the model is dead. There's no doubt about it. The where you have a break every 15 minutes, and your ratings are a function of holding people over the break to get advertising. That's done. And I think you're right. But what I'm suggesting is we're doing an hour and a half of content today or 2 hours of content. We could upload this, and I have equipment, where that is a functional, you could bypass satellite, you could do it all through IP, you could do it live through IP and pump it out, not too dissimilar from the way that they do it with a satellite hookup, but it's much cheaper, right? A satellite hookup for a show, you got to pay $1,000, $2,000 a month just to get it uploaded.
Can you explain what you mean by that? I have no idea what you mean when you say satellite upload.
If I'm doing a show, so I can tell you this, that about 4 years ago, I did a 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern radio show. Ed Schultz had left, and there was some slot opened up, and I tried it for a couple of months. And it was an independent thing. The guys I was working with got me to a studio in Times Square, maybe it was a Clear Channel studio, I don't know. I would go in that room, I would do the show, it would get sent to a satellite uplink, sends it up and then sends it back down, and each radio station across the country that was carrying the show has a receiver, and they would play the show live that way. And just getting them that product, because everything was legacy equipment, was an extra couple of grand a month, right? And
gotcha. So you're saying like that satellite
free. Now, if I put a unit that cost me $1,100 in the studio, then I could put one in that in 20 different stations, and I can do it where it's free. It's just the internet, and so that cost is gone. And so the idea is that I think you can get to the point where radio is the bar to entry becomes only nominally more expensive than the bar to entry on, let's say, YouTube.
Gotcha.
And at that point, if I can say to you guys, look, you're doing your Harry's ad, and we come up with a metric where we say to Harry's, like, we want a cost per acquisition on your sales, or here's the coupon code, but we're going to be delivering that to maybe another 100,000 people, conceivably. I mean, I think like there's not going to be huge margins in it, but I think the idea is that it's going to be in the same way that like you guys would say, like, why wouldn't we put this show on? I'll put it on, if I can stream this to Twitch and to YouTube and to Vimeo and to Facebook all simultaneously, why wouldn't I? I would, unless one of them was giving me a specific,
exclusivity deal or something.
Exclusivity deal, or somehow I thought it hurt my monetization on one of the platforms. But I think like by now, my sense is that doesn't happen. Like, I can stream on Facebook and YouTube, and I'm not going to lose viewers on YouTube. I'm just going to gain them on Facebook.
Wait, why don't you guys stream on Twitch then? What's going on with that?
We're trying to. It's really just our own technical limitations, to be honest with you. We may do that for the debates tonight. I want to.
Steve here can get you set up with that pretty easily.
Yeah. The Chapo guys were streaming yesterday too, so.
I know they were, and I had to take we had about 100,000 views on our YouTube debate coverage. At one point, we were up to 14,000 people contemporaneously, but then I heard that YouTube is giving people strikes for doing
the NBC rebroadcasting.
There's a few nefarious people who got banned as a result. That's true.
And so I got worried because, I mean, I think we're doing, I think it's fair use. I mean, we're commenting throughout the entire thing. But
we had a copyright attorney come on previously to one of these shows, and it's incredibly nuanced, the act of doing this live commentating. And I think he even said a lot of this stuff really needs to go to court to find out what is or isn't. And the issue is YouTube doesn't give a shit. They're just going to be like, we like NBC, you're a small fry, see you later. So that's all it's going to take in that case. And
exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we pulled it down because I was like, I can't afford to not be able to stream for 90 days. You get one strike on YouTube with that, and you're out for 90 days.
Which is a lifetime in online content, and very, very scary. And fighting anything Through
that would
YouTube
affect
is a
the
nightmare.
subscription. Does YouTube has like subscriptions, the equivalent of like Twitch subscriptions, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much. I mean, I don't know how much that would be implicated, but I just know that for my channel in particular, when we started live streaming, things started really popping on my channel, and that's our big. I think the thing that I do different from most of these, you do it differently, but most of the people in my space, like Kyle Kalinske and David Pakman, they tend to, I feel like I'm doing a radio show. I just put a camera on it. They're actually like constructing separate segments and sewing them together, and then maybe doing a live segment at one point or another. So for me, that's really important. But the point being there though is that like radio as a medium, I think is ultimately just going to be another platform for.
When you say radio, you mean essentially audio only content, basically, correct?
Audio only content that you can get over the airwaves.
Over the airwaves, meaning the internet, or literally still FM style?
I'm talking literally AM, FM.
So you think that? What do you think the lifespan of AM, FM is at this point? I mean, don't you think we're going to have some sort of, I don't want to say revolution, but essentially what we had with broadcast television going to digital only and having huge fallback on the viewers there? Like, what's your take on the future of AM, FM radio?
It's still going to be I don't see why it would go away. I mean, the cost associated with I just don't see why it would go away. I mean, you can stream stuff in your car, I guess, and we'll ultimately get to that, but I don't see like why if I think when people go into their cars and they listen to radio, they do so, there's a habitual quality to it that I think is where there is something that people like the idea of getting a medium that is a push as opposed to a pull medium, right? Like I like to get into my car. I don't even like to think about having to prep what I'm going to listen to or anything like that. I turn on the car, and they used to say like, that's why if you're going to take a day off in radio, you don't do it on a Monday or a Friday, because you particularly don't do it on a Friday because you want to make sure that they have left their dial on your station. And I think I think that's there. I think it's just a question of like the value of those stations to go down enough where all you have is a stick and you just send it out. And why wouldn't you?
I'm super curious.
The question is if the business can survive to that point, right?
The business doesn't have to. Like all I literally need is I want the business to fall apart. Because
there's significant cost, isn't there, with operating FM transmitters and AM transmitters and that type of stuff?
Not really. The cost
real estate and whatnot? No? Okay.
They're usually just like the real estate. No, like they exist. And the real estate, people don't put radio towers in a place where, I'm sure there are some locations where like, we got to build condos here, but that's not, they're just,
sure.
The sticks are literally just in the sticks. And, upstate, I used to do my radio show from upstate at one point, and I would beam it down through an ISDN box, and there was a radio station right where I live, like a mile and a half away from where I was. I was out in the country. Mm-hmm. They had two big sticks, and I went in there, and there was nobody there.
I have a question for you.
There's nobody running the station. There's just a machine, and it just go, and that's it.
On this front, when you browse the radio, there's obviously not every station is essentially taken. There's going to be dead air in there. What is the cost today? Let's say, if you're in Nebraska and you want, you find out that 96.5 is not taken. What is the cost for you to say, you know what? I'm going to set up a radio station. 96.5 is going to be me.
The FCC regulations, and I don't know this too well, but the FCC regulations are such that you need to have that each of those frequencies, at least above a certain point on the dial, require a certain amount of wattage. in terms of the strength, that they reserve those frequencies for a specific strength of wattage, which basically translates into distance. And so you might have expenses that are associated with building a tower and, buying the equipment. But what I'm talking about are stations that already exist.
Sure.
And most of them are going to become like Christian broadcasting. And I'm not being facetious about this. And I think, and probably, and then, depending on the locale, I think you're going to get a lot of Spanish speaking radio. And then I think they're just going to stay there and be maybe, something's going to happen to them, to these towers, and they're going to get cheaper. And then at one point they're going to be valuable billboards, I think.
I'm kind of curious, backing up a little bit too. You seem like you really enjoyed the acting thing and the writing scripts and that whole process. I admit, just because of the nature of online stuff, I don't have time to consume anywhere near as much media as I want to. But do you guys incorporate like a lot of skits or that type of stuff into your stuff? I haven't seen any of that at all. Is that something you wish you could do more? Especially like when we talked about in the pre-show, like a lot of like online leftist or lefty content is getting more popular, right? You've got Natalie with ContraPoints, Philosophy Tube, H-Bomber Guy. Has that ever been something you've considered doing, like writing skits for the Majority Report?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so jealous of younger people who are starting out now and are basically being able to say like, I'm going to when I look at like the stuff that ContraPoints does, like that she's doing like artwork. Mm-hmm. And it's, I think like doing a daily show with 2.5 hours, 3 hours like we do is just, it's too relentless.
For sure.
And I just don't have the time to do it. And I've got 2 kids and I have sole custody of them half the time. And I just don't have the time. My contributor on the show, Michael Brooks, has spun off a show and he's doing 1 show a week and he's doing great. The show is doing great. And I'm just jealous at the fact that like he gets to plot out what he's going to do. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to have this segment. I'm going to create that segment. And I've never, it's just been too much to do that. And so I've sort of resigned myself, and it took a while to get used to that because when I was in show business, right before I started radio, I had spent 9 months producing 6 half hours, maybe, like between the script writing and the shooting and the editing, maybe the whole process 8, 9 months. And it's like every one of those minutes is accounted for, in those half hours. And now it's just like, it's a different thing. And it took a while for me to get used to the idea of like, to the extent that we do anything that's funny, it's disposable. As opposed to the stuff I used to work on where I was like, this is, designed for people to watch like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I'm older now. And so I'm tired.
So this is something I'm really curious about in regards to your work. Have you ever watched the Andy Milonakis show? Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, I remember that guy. I haven't watched it in years, but he was from Kimmel, right? They found him on Kimmel.
Yeah, he streams on Twitch. He's a cool guy. He's a friend of mine, and we talk sometimes about doing online content. And I'm really curious about what you just said, because you would spend, when you're writing scripts or you're doing shows, you spend so much time, like every single minute has got so much thought that's going into it, as opposed to content creators now. I'll use myself as an example, not you, but like I come on and I stream for like 8 hours a day, and it's largely, to use your words, disposable content. You watch it one time. A lot of people don't even like to watch the VODs for this kind of stuff, because if they don't see it live, they're like, who cares? What's the big deal? Do you ever feel like you don't have as much satisfaction from doing like so many hours of live content, that you don't get the same type of fulfillment as you do from doing like prepared work? This is something that Andy's complained a lot about. So, and you come from showbiz, so I'm curious. Definitely.
I've largely gotten over it, but for a long time, yes. And I've done of this iteration of the Majority Report, I don't know, 2,000 shows more. I don't know. And I can't remember what I did last week, But I
Yeah.
can still tell you about cuts that I made in this show pilot season. Like I remember cuts, and I remember like literally we cut. I cut on the downbeat as opposed to this. Like I can remember those, and I made that 15 years ago. So yes, I do miss that. It's different. It's
sure.
different. But I also, it's different. And there are times where I think of like, maybe in a couple of years I can stop doing this and I'll do this show that I have in my head, that type of thing.
That's actually one of the things I think is interesting is where is the Majority Report at this day and age as far as staff and direction, and where are you really trying to go with it essentially moving forward?
Or even starting, how many people work for you guys now? How big is it?
We have 4 people on payroll in the office, and who come in with different sort of roles and times, but are all more or less present during the show. I have a couple of people working remotely who are contractors, doing social media, basically optimizing YouTube. And we're just about to launch. You're breaking news.
Oh boy.
You're breaking news.
Outstanding.
We are going to launch a morning, very brief morning brief show.
On YouTube or in some other format or medium?
Audio at first.
Okay.
And maybe YouTube, but it's so quick. But to be honest with you, like I've tried to think around where it's going, but I'm not doing this as a business. You know what I mean? Like I never, I think I'm good at optimizing what I'm doing at the point and figuring out how to run a business to do what I want to do, but I've never had business aspirations. So it's only occurred to me, lately, like, hey, I would like this business to make money when I don't have to be sitting here talking, but how does that happen? And I also like one of the things that I've wanted to do, like if someone was to come to me and go like, here's $1 million, what are you going to do? I think what I would do would be some variation of what we're talking about with the radio thing, which would be to seed a bunch of like independent shows, develop political ones. I mean, this is the only reason why I'm doing this is basically for the politics. Because I would go back to show business if I didn't care about the politics.
Wait, real quick. When you say you care about the politics, do you mean like you care talking about it? You feel like you're making a measurable change in American opinion or worldwide opinion, or what do you mean by politics?
I feel like I'm making an immeasurable. I wouldn't even. Butterfly wings is basically it.
Okay.
Maybe someday, maybe it can help. If I thought it had absolutely, if somebody gave me verifiable proof that it's not helping, I would go, okay, I'm rolling this up. But nobody can give me that verifiable proof that it's not helping. So I think that it could, look, I know that I'm helping some people sell books.
Sure. I mean, you're supposedly you're really big online, but I haven't seen Steven Crowder respond to your debate challenge at all yet, so I'm not entirely sure.
I also have, we're going to do a special report on that soon, actually. Yeah. There's more to that story than I have the receipts.
Okay.
But yeah, like, I don't know. I mean, do you have a sense if you're making, well, I mean, I will say this, like, I after this, I'm going to interview Caleb Kane, and I interviewed him for Ring of Fire, and he specifically cited you as to why, how he got out of this sort of like alt-right wormhole that he was falling into. And the YouTube world for me, like, has brought about a new sort of sense of purpose, to be totally honest with you. And that's it right there. Like 4 years ago, in fact, he's coming on the show tomorrow, but Matt Binder used to be a producer here, and he has a podcast called Doomed. And he, when my son was born, I wanted to take a little time off on Mondays so that I could spend time with the kid. And he and Michael Brooks would host the show. And Matt would come to me and he goes like, I want to interview this person or debate this person. He's a men's rights activist. And I'm like, oh, dude, that's not politics. And he would come to me. He's like, look, there's this controversy about gaming stuff. And I'm like, do what you want. But as far as I'm concerned, that's not politics. That's just fucking bullshit. And then, like 3 years later, all those guys are in the White House. And so I was like, I need to reevaluate. I mean, and half the show now is dedicated to going after people like Dave Rubin and Steven Crowder. Like 2.5 years ago, I noticed that Dave Rubin said that he was writing a book. Now, apparently it isn't, I don't know what happened to it, but he was writing a book. And I was like, I remember saying to everybody in the office, I want to make it so that if any journalist searches for Dave Rubin on Twitter, wherever it is, that I come up and they get a different story about him. That was my goal. Because the guy, I know he's never going to deal with me face to face. So I'm going to make it so that I'm going to basically, cock block, excuse the expression, his ability to get mainstream media coverage. And I feel like I may have done that. I think to a certain extent, it is very hard for him to get written up by somebody in the way that he was starting to get press coverage. And that's part of the agenda. But yeah, for me, it's about doing the politics. And so I think, I don't know, maybe it's possible I'm not helping at all, but I don't feel like I'm hurting.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious. We approach this way differently. So I'm curious for you, at what level, I don't want to use the word martyrdom, but like at what level do you think that it's like, this is too much? Or like, so let's say, for instance, you have the opportunity to pursue like some other interest, whether it's something in show business that's lightly political or something that you just, or even taking a break from the show just to take more time for yourself. How do you figure like, I'm willing to make this much of a personal sacrifice because I feel like I'm making a measurable change? Like, is that something that you would like drive yourself into the ground doing because you feel so strongly about it? Or is there like a pretty easy breaking point where you're like, this is too much, like I don't want to do this anymore? How do you approach that? How do you even begin to think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in the run up to the 2004 election, I got offered a movie with Ben Affleck. I specifically remember telling my manager, like, dude, I've been telling everybody this is the most important election in, our lifetime. And I think it was. I thought it at the time, and in retrospect, I think it might have been, frankly, the 2004 election. And I was like, I can't do this. And really, since then, I think that like, I will go in and I will take a day like I did A Good Fight, the show on CBS, a day on that, like a year or two ago, or I would take a week if it came up now. I think people would be okay with that. It's something to break it up. For something longer than that, I feel like I have a responsibility on some level. And certainly because I have, a lot of my funding comes from membership, and I sort of feel I'd feel less obligated if people weren't paying to support the show. But I've toyed with the idea of like, boy, it would be nice to take a week off. Like right now we take off, everybody takes off. Everybody on the show at least gets the Department of Education vacations that we get. And then 1 week in the summer. And everybody else on the show tends to take another week or so. Some more than others. I'm not going to point any fingers. They're not here in the office at the time, but it's Michael Brooks. And, but yeah, I mean, I've thought like, I'd have maybe Michael fill in. I would feel bad about it. I would feel bad about it. I don't perceive myself as a martyr. I feel like I'm super lucky to be able to do this show. And I run into people on the street who are like, I love your show and this and that. It makes me feel good that, people enjoy it. So I don't feel like a martyr. I do feel like I have a responsibility. And if another opportunity came up, it's unlikely now. I'm sort of past that largely, but if one of my friends from show business came in and said, can you do 2 or 3 weeks on a movie? I would do it.
Sure.
And, I could do maybe some interviews and this and that, but I do, it's in the back of my mind, like this is a responsibility I can't walk away from.
In that vein, I guess, when it comes to looking at the Majority Report, if you could talk to viewers, this is something I think about a lot. What's like the 1 or 2 things you want them to take away after consuming like content that you do for some amount of time? Like if you could say like, hey, what is it that you like about my show? What do you want to hear the most as a response that makes you feel like you're doing or you have like a fulfilling job, or you're doing something good for the world?
I want them to walk away with a better understanding of like political dynamics, of the mechanisms of policy. I want them to have a greater appreciation for the importance of the judiciary in the context of our system. I want them to think strategically in terms of politics and in terms of power, and then I want them to get active and basically go out and do what I'm doing for them or with them to other people. That's basically it. I mean, I just want to be creating ripples and have them carry those ripples forward. And yeah, that's it. I mean, that would be it. It's like when people call in and say, yeah, like I've gotten involved in politics, or I'm running for office, or I explained to my dad that Medicare spends 3 cents, 2 cents on every dollar on administrative costs versus private insurance spends, 18 cents on every dollar. And my dad was like, maybe we should have Medicare for everybody. Like that would make me feel very happy.
Your parents are way more receptive to political stuff than mine are.
Oh, my parents are.
God.
I'm saying other people's
parents.
Oh,
okay, yeah. I think my mom screamed at me last year when we talked about it. She said, Obamacare didn't call me to give me any health insurance. I don't know what you're... Oh, God. Parents in politics is a nightmare. For the Majority Report stuff, when you think about that, so you're basically like advocating for like people to be political activists that are informed, like informed political activism, basically.
Yeah.
So again, I have very limited time to follow stuff online, or I'm just lazy, whichever one you want to take. Have you guys ever thought of doing something where, like the Young Turks did a lot of like large, like I think like fundraising political stuff to like get like certain candidates, more mobilized. Have you guys ever thought about getting involved in stuff like that, like really taking on a candidate, or like in terms of advocacy or something like that? Do you have those kinds of aspirations, or is it outside of what you want to do?
On the radio, I used to do that. On the radio, I think, frankly, on radio, I think I pioneered that largely. I mean, at one point, we teamed up with Marcus Malitzis back in like 2004, maybe in the run up to the 2004 election. And we were fundraising. We could raise some real money for people on radio. My platform was too small to do that in this instance, it seems to me. I mean, I will... I just sort of largely got out of the candidate business because I think there are better platforms to do that. And I'm just more often than not disappointed by politicians. And so I just feel like there's too much almost like getting like emotionally attached to politicians as opposed to issue sets. And too much worried about whether this person is sincere or not sincere, or is a true blue. Like, I don't care. I have a low estimation of people in general when I get when I get look at them specifically.
For sure.
And I don't care if someone is, pushing Medicare for all because it's opportunistic for them.
Mm-hmm.
If they're subject to, if their calculation is that it behooves them to push for this and that it's policy that will help them, great. I don't care.
Okay, oh man, I have the same opinion sometimes, and I see there are a lot of people. I don't want to get too into the purity testing stuff or whatever that a lot of people on the left seem to be involved in. But like anytime I see a company do things where they have like either LGBT advertisements or their movies with LGBT characters, and everybody's saying like, oh, well, they're just doing it to make money or to push a narrative. I always wonder like, yeah, so what? Is that really that bad of an idea? Like if we have like the greater representation, like as long as at the end of the day you're accomplishing some like good after effect, like,
Yeah, I'm not going to give credit to a company for being, they're so great because they're doing this. I'm just going to say like, good.
Yeah.
I mean, if I measure the results and or anticipate the results, and so I have no problem with people doing good things for craven reasons, as long as it's ultimately good things. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to trust those people or not, but I just like, I have a notion of how I want society to look like. And it's not all going to be done by people who have like the purest of intentions.
Sure.
I'm curious how advertising works on political content specifically. Do you find it difficult? And also, do you have people coming after your advertisers if you do the wrong things? Is it hard to hold on to them? Is it the lower CPMs because your content can be like that? What's the challenge as far as having selling ads, I guess, against political content?
Well, I can sort of like bullet point it over the course of doing it. So obviously, I get ads on YouTube. That seems to be agnostic as to I have no sense of I don't even know what ads are playing on YouTube. So the ads I get, I get from mid-roll, primarily on my podcast. And when we started out with mid-roll years ago, they said, send us a list of your big names that you have on your show. And I'm like, I mean, like Naomi Klein or like Matt Taibbi or, and they're like, who? I'm like, well, like Glenn Greenwald. What? Like they had no idea.
Yeah.
Like no idea whatsoever who so I was like, oh, this is going to be a bit of a problem because, and for a long time, advertising was just sort of anemic. Things picked up a couple of years ago because, I also had to tell them like, all right, yeah, no, I can't do that ad. And they're like, why? And I'm like, well, I have a problem with Uber as a company, or I'm not representing any banks, or, I'm not going to tell people to buy gold or whatever it is. Like, I've just there's
gold is a sound investment. All right. For us preppers out there.
I mean, now it doesn't happen as much because they already can anticipate to a large extent. Like I've cut off like a whole set of industries, but at one point I was like every third or fourth ad, I was like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And they didn't, they're selling to comedy podcasts. The concept was just bizarre to them. And I would get on and they'd say, well, what about go on a phone call with them? And I remember there was like one where it was like, some type of like crowdsourced lending. And I just got on the call with these people. I'm like, can you tell me what regulatory agency is looking into this? Like, who do you respond to? You know what? Yeah, that's a great question. We're going to get back to you
on that. Yeah, never.
It sounds like you have some difficulty getting advertisers then if you're going this deep with this type of stuff.
Well, but so now it's been okay. But I've never had a problem with anybody coming back from content. But I don't know if you're aware of what happened with Mike Cernovich and I.
Oh, the MSNBC thing?
Oh, yeah. Yes, like a campaign to basically screw you essentially with by pulling up an old tweet or something? Is that what we're talking about?
I had a tweet that I wrote in like 2009 in response to a petition that was going around to allow Roman Polanski to come back into the country to accept some type of like lifetime achievement award. And Roman Polanski left the country after he had been convicted of statutory rape for a 13-year-old girl who had been basically drugged. And he skipped the country because he thought that the judge was not going to accept the plea deal and was going to give him more time than he thought, whatever it was. And I had seen a lot of friends who were directors who were signing this thing, and it was gross to me. And so I tweeted out something to the fact, like, I don't care about Roman Polanski, but if my daughter's ever raped, I hope it's by a much older man who has a great sense of mise en scène. And
Jesus,
I did it in 2009, and then
a much different time back then.
Yeah, that was a different world for comedy.
It was a different world for comedy, but frankly, I stand by the sentiment of that tweet. Like, I don't know if I would use those words today, per se, but I have no problem with that tweet. And a year and a half ago, it was my birthday. I got off the subway. I was walking to the supermarket to get some stuff because I was having some people over for dinner. And I saw that tweet pop up. And I'm like, what the is this? And I went to see who had tweeted out. It was just like somebody with like 25 followers. And I was like, I'm just going to delete the tweet. Like, I don't have time to look at this. I'm just going to delete it. Who cares?
Oh, no.
And by the time I got to the supermarket, I got a call from MSNBC saying, do you know who Mike Cernovich is? Yeah, I made fun of him yesterday on my show. And, well, he's found a tweet of yours. And so, long story short, MSNBC ended up firing me. But over the course of that week, I had found out from one of the advertisers who was not from Midroll that they had gotten an email claiming from like some child rape group saying that they want, it was clearly a fake email, right? That you got to drop me. And I realized like, oh, he's going after my advertisers. And that's when I really panicked. Because the MSNBC gig, frankly, like, it doesn't pay very much. And the value of it to me is like every once in a while I get to go on there and, champion a position that's not there. I mean, I think I'm probably arguably one of the more left, if not the most left person that is allowed to go on there on a regular basis anyways. Mm-hmm. When we bombed Syria, I was the only person on MSNBC in the prime time saying full-throatedly, we should not be bombing Syria, which is sad, but, it gives me a reason to do it. But beyond that, and it makes my parents happy. They can, their friends say, like, I saw your son on MSNBC on TV, and that's it. But so I was worried about the advertisements, and Marin and Brendan McDonald, they basically said, anybody who drops Sam's show cannot advertise on our show. And so they basically saved my advertisers because by stepping in and doing that. And that was the only time that politics theoretically in any way implicated my ads. Ultimately, I was rehired by MSNBC, which is a whole nother story. But
do you think that that's an effective strategy for dealing, like, for instance, with people like Steven Crowder? Is this an actual effective strategy that people should be using to try and change what's going on, or do you not condone that aspect? Like, for the people out there that feel marginalized or anything by Steven Crowder, should they be doing letter writing campaigns to his advertisers saying what you're doing is wrong?
Oh, I don't think what was done to me was wrong from a process standpoint. I just think that tweet is clearly, in fact, I had anti-rape activists who were saying this is the 1% of rape jokes that are okay. Because I was attacking the people who were being apologists for rape. And, it's satire. clearly I don't get to choose who rapes my daughter. And the idea of choosing who rapes your daughter based upon their ability to create a good composition with the shot of their, on their film, that's clearly satire, right?
Yeah, if you're rich or wealthy, you have status, you basically get a pass on a lot of this stuff, right? Like, like O.J. Simpson-esque, I hope that if my fiance gets murdered by a basketball player, I hope that they at least average, whatever points a game, right? Like in that vein, yeah.
Well, I mean, just the idea, yeah. I mean, it's satire, and I think like I can understand why corporations don't have the ability to make that assessment in the same way that, let's say, MSNBC did. Like MSNBC spends millions of dollars theoretically a year, hundreds of millions of dollars, I imagine, trying to figure out what the truth is and presenting it, right? And so, like, you should be able to, everybody there is English speakers. Everybody should be able to figure out what satire is. Everybody understood what it meant. And, I got interviewed about somebody who wanted me to, like, I can't remember who it was, maybe Jeffrey Lord, that guy on CNN, and I can't remember what he did. Called somebody Hitler, or I don't know what he did. And so, don't, that's my opinion. Don't, no one sue me for that. I don't remember what it was. And somebody, a reporter called me and he said, don't you feel like you should defend Jeffrey Lord? No, I don't. Well, but he's in the same situation you are. No, what he said was garbage. And I don't, you can say whatever you want, but that doesn't mean that you get to keep your job as a contributor on cable news. It doesn't mean that you get to do a podcast with, a razor company sponsoring you. No, there are consequences for what you say or what you do, and there should be. I just advocate for, the consequences to be determined at least on face value. If society felt like if satire was a horrific thing that we all agreed was problematic and had caused, the subjugation of a lot of people, and I probably wouldn't have used satire. So I think we should contextualize this. We should have the ability to take these things in context. So I think Crowder, I think he should be deplatformed. Or at the very least, I don't think that Steven Crowder has any type of right to make money off that shit. Mm-hmm. He can, if we feel that YouTube, because like I personally feel that YouTube needs to be broken up. I think all of these companies are too large. I think there's too much money being made via them. And I think a lot of like YouTube is unhealthy, frankly, for society. And I have no problem with it being broken up and becoming less lucrative for people. I'm all in favor of that. I think it's perfectly within their realm to say, you know what? Because we're the town square now, you can do your show, but we're not going to allow you to make money off this.
I'm kind of curious in terms of your overall view. This could kind of branch off into something totally different, but just like roughly, like when it comes to things like satire, especially growing up, I'm kind of like a cynical, dark humor-esque person, and I've always been a big fan of satire and those forms of comedy. Do you feel like satire is really hard to do these days because of because like satire becomes indistinguishable from people's actual positions these days?
I mean, I saw Mort Saul say that 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think The Onion does a good job of it, I think. I look at the Onion headlines, and I think they're pretty funny, and I think they capture something. I mean, it's really just it's tricky, but I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, the satire has to go different places, and it's difficult because we have mediums where people can't fully understand them. Like it's hard to know if someone's being satirical in a tweet, maybe. Yeah. But people need to look at context. I mean, I frankly have no problem with some things being misunderstood. Mm-hmm.
Well, you brought up previously that you'd be okay with Steven Crowder essentially not being able to be making money off of YouTube. Do you think that sort of system where you were to break up YouTube or whatever it is would also seriously negative affect people who may be on the left or people who aren't pushing a negative reason? And is that a fair? It's almost like the better to not have one innocent man go to jail and set 100 free that we're guilty type of thing. Like, is that worth the trade-off there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree in terms of jail, but in terms of like the opportunity to make big wads of cash on YouTube, I think it is detrimental to society to have this type of economic concentration with one company that is so important that if it follows its term of service, that it's creating a national, they're holding hearings on it in Congress, right? I mean, that's what the House was holding hearings on shadow banning and shit like that, which is just
or Diamond and Silk's appearance before.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there's a whole nother host of reasons why I think we should be, sort of like breaking stuff up and where we should need to return to the antitrust regime we had before the 80s. Mm-hmm. But yeah, do
you think YouTube outside of Google, just imagine YouTube as its own company, do you think that's enough just to have YouTube by itself, not owned by anyone else, or is even that too big in your opinion?
I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to, I don't think they should have ever been allowed to buy it, Google, in the first place. And now, like, I don't have a sense of how big it is, if that would be enough, but that's where I would start. And then I would assess, do we need to do more of this? I mean, the integration with search and with advertising is highly problematic. And I suspect that if YouTube did not have that relationship with the broader Google, then their ability to serve so many videos would be diminished. And then they would have to impose, they would have to have a slightly different business model. I mean, look, the problem with Google right now is that, or with YouTube, is that they're doing this all by algorithm. My understanding from talking to people who work at Google is what they don't want to do is have to staff with human beings. They want to do it all through artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. And you can see all the problems with that.
Of course.
Right? Yeah. And so if they actually sat down and watched one of my videos, they could assess like, oh, this is satire, or this is not promoting, hate, or whatever it is, but they don't want to do that.
And it's even more frustrating because the emails they send you when they tell you that your stuff has been demonetized, like it says after a manual review of your video, it's like, there is no way that somebody watched this and came to this conclusion. I know that it's because of the title and because of a few of the words that showed up probably in like the text, like the closed captions or whatever. There's no way that somebody watched this video. Yeah.
I think the manual review, what they're saying is that we check to see if the inputs into the algorithm were in line with what our criteria were.
Yeah.
Sometimes those inputs come in and they get in some way corrupted.
Sure.
Now, I'm not sure what those inputs are, et cetera, or what the weighting system is for different things, but that's what they're not reviewing the content.
No, yeah.
Reviewing the signifiers that are associated with the content.
Basically, they have the algorithm that determines if the video makes it or not, and then if it doesn't, then they manually review it by running it through a second algorithm to make sure the first one works. Basically, right. Yeah.
That's true. I think that's true. And sometimes it reverses and sometimes it doesn't. Mm-hmm. But this is an example of a company profiting on their lack of hiring human beings to do this job. That creates problems in society insofar as, it warps one of the major platforms for expression. So we have a classic case of we're going to externalize the cost, right? Because society pays the cost. Society pays the cost.
Are you saying that you wouldn't allow some content in your ideal vision? Like, for instance, let me give you an example. Let's say there was a very fundamentalist preacher or something who said that gay people were evil and he wanted to upload a sermon to this new YouTube. Do you think that type of content, which he believes his religion says or whatever it is that the type of content that should be allowed under his religion, or should that not be allowed because that's offending a lot of other people and essentially causing them harm?
I think the idea is that you would have competing services. And some services would cater to some audiences and some to others.
Do you think that that's better? Because I mean, essentially, we have that with like what is it, Gab and I don't know, Stormfront or whatever. Now it
But
doesn't
they're
seem
not.
like
They don't really compete at scale, right? Like these are
Yeah.
basically.
well, sure, right, but
They can't. They can't compete at scale because you have these platforms which are so integrated with these, and so capitalized. But yeah, I think it would be better because you wouldn't have people stumbling onto this stuff. You would force people to go and look for it more.
Yeah.
And
well, that's I think where a lot of the pushback is going to be from, right? For someone religious in the South trying to go and see something that says, "Hey, the Confederacy is awesome," and he can't find that. That's like the offensive part to him that he couldn't be on his site.
yeah, I mean, and so go to a different site.
Yeah. I think the problem is, I think, like, in terms of what Sam's saying, like, the vertical integration is insane. That I can go to a store and I buy, like, a cell phone, and that cell phone comes preloaded with an operating system that's mining all of my stuff, that's giving me advertisements in my email that might link me to YouTube videos that are being advertised by, like, and all of it is ran by, like, a single unifying company. And it's like, how do you even begin to, one, compete with that as another, like, product, and then two, as a consumer, how do you escape from that when it's everywhere? Where do you go on the internet where Google doesn't have their fingers involved in some way?
Let's not forget that in, I don't know how many states is it in the country right now. Half the states, you can get fired for being gay. You can get fired from your job for being gay. Not for anything that you say, not for anything that you do. You can get fired from your job for being gay. You can be denied housing because you're gay. Like, the idea that I should have the right to go on to a video platform, and say anything. It's just like, what? There's no basis certainly there's no basis in American law for that. There's no basis in any law. And I can't see how you say that it's healthy for society. Now, the problem is that YouTube is the only outlet for that. That that the size of YouTube and Facebook in particular have become so large and have overpowered our society. But we don't, where's my hour on MSNBC? It's like it would be absurd to say, how come, the news isn't covering this? I mean, so I think that, like, the internet, you have an opportunity to post a video on many different formats and put it on your website. If you want to say God hates fags, you can do that. If you want to say, kikes are cheap, you can make a video and put that right on that website and do it. And but there's no reason why you should have a right to monetize it on YouTube. That's just absurd, so I have no problem with that. I have no problem. I mean, that's you hear the right talk about the marketplace of ideas all the time. Like, well,
It's, dude, my biggest pet peeve is, you get workers that are laid off from their jobs. You get workers that are fired for being gay or discriminating against in other sense. You have all of these issues where, conservatives always talk about, well, the free market will step in. If they were truly discriminating, then another employer will come in and fix this. That's how
right,
the free market.
Of course, it's absurd.
But when it comes to Twitter or Facebook, where conservatives are being discriminated against, well, hold on, maybe these should be public utility. I couldn't believe. I think this picked up maybe like a year or two ago when it really started to pick up, where conservatives were unironically saying, like, oh, Facebook should be nationalized. Like this, like, we need to Venezuela our Facebooks and our Twitters. And it's like, oh wow, that's what it took to bring you over to the some companies are too large to fail site. Like, Jesus, that's insane to me. Yeah.
That's how every conservative has a revelation. My son is gay, and now I realize that gay people should have rights.
Yeah.
Or
my mistress got pregnant. Maybe abortion isn't the worst thing in the world. Yeah.
Exactly. But I will say this, that, like, I think there's something to nationalizing these things as utilities.
For sure.
The only problem is that then you really get into First Amendment issues, where, like, every video does need to be sort of like tested as, like, is this being anti-discriminatory? Can you, what can't you put up there? Which is why I feel like that would be even that much more difficult to to have them nationalized, the best thing to do is just to break them up into small pieces, so there isn't a one entity where if you're not on it, you're at a extreme disadvantage.
For sure.
It's interesting to hear the conservatives are, I would assume, let me put it this way. It feels like leftists should almost be in love with the Google situation right now just because of how upset conservatives are. So it's strange to hear, to a certain extent, that you're trying to break them up when conservatives are so furious over the fact that they're getting evicted from these things wholesale at this point. Don't you think they're kind of self-regulating in a little bit? Like we had the Donald gone from Reddit the other day. We have a lot of these big guys essentially. I think I read something the other day that like Trump's tweets might fall under a new policy under Twitter's.
Yeah, that's all well and good. I mean, my experience of the way that the right develops their policies has a lot to do with what they think is going to piss off and how they're going to beat liberals. And frankly, like, I engage in that stuff. We've talked about why a little bit in terms of like, dunking on these people. But at the end of the day, like my critique is not founded in what, is good or bad for Steven Crowder. I don't, I want to prevent him from reaching younger people. But at the end of the day, there's a whole host of issues around antitrust and around monopolies that have had massive problems for society that are not exclusive to tech at all. They exist across our society in many different areas, and tech is just one of them. The whole antitrust philosophy in this country changed under Reagan and was one that was basically geared towards allowing the consolidation of power, both like economic and political power. And that's going to be broken up. And the tech stuff is almost like is just one silo, one industry where that's got to happen. So yeah, like I'm not dictating my opinions on these policies are not a function of like what's good or bad for, Steven Crowder. That kid's got some real problems, and eventually they're gonna catch up with him. I think he's got some serious emotional. There's some issues there. Let me just put it that way.
Okay.
Maybe it's just a raw appeal to capitalism, and it's working for him, and he just wants to be wealthy. I
don't know. When you got a guy who's followed by his dad as much as he is, and a guy who, he's an adult and is like gay bashing like a kid in junior high, who doesn't, who's been living under a rock. There's a weird dynamic there. Let's just put it that way. And those things, I think, tend to catch up with you.
I don't disagree. I just think that there's a market for being an asshole, in a sense, to a certain amount of people. And I don't think there's very few people who are going to be like you, as saying, you know what, I'll make less money if I can feel like I'm doing a little bit of good in the world. There's plenty of people with like, I'll do a harm in the world for some money. Fuck yeah, let's do this, 100%. And
I think
he may have stumbled into it. Yeah,
I think that's true too. I think that's true, definitely.
I guess so. We're coming up to about. Wait, are we coming out of 2 hours? Or do we have like a half hour left?
Half hour left.
Oh, okay. We got about okay. I have like a bunch of random like questions that I thought were very interesting from my audience, just in terms of like kind of political questions. The first one, here's an easy one. What do you recommend people like consume insofar as media goes to stay relatively informed with as free from bias as possible? Understanding that that's not.
I would say the Majority Report.
Yeah. Let me rephrase that. What do you read to prepare yourself for the Majority Report? What do you digest?
I don't read by publication anymore. You know what I mean? Like I have, I use my Twitter feed as what do we used to call that? The CSS?
RSS.
RSS feeds.
It's still a great system. Thank you.
I use my Twitter as my RSS feed, and I don't know that I don't think you can find, I don't know what unbiased means. Everybody has bias.
Yeah.
So what I read and what I look for are people who over a period of time write in such a way that I find is sound. And so I always, when I look at a story, like I will try and read at least one right-wing source on it. and then I will read, this story. So I'll go to like, I'll go across the board, but a lot of the stories that inform me, I get from the American Prospect now. David Dayen is the executive editor there, and he is newly appointed, and he is, I think he's brilliant. But I read all of the sort of lefty magazines, the Jacobin, the Nation. I still read a couple of blogs, Hullabaloo and Atrios. And I will get some news reports like from Daily Kos. I will read the New Republic, I think I said. I'll read, and then I read a lot from books. I talk to authors every day who are writing about policy, and that's where I learn a lot of the stuff. I had a doctor's appointment today, and he was like, you can get these generics. And I said, well, are you aware that, the FDA barely regulates these generics that are made from around the world? And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I just interviewed somebody on this, and it's nuts. And he's like, it's funny because I've had people who say to me, like, one generic is more effective than another generic. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, it's because there's nobody basically checking if, how these things are constructed. So that's where I get a lot of my information is from authors, but there are good blogs. I think the idea is just like read. If you're going to read about a story, read about it. You can get your Google News thing to take, like, I'll take one from Fox, I'll take one from the New Republic or whatever, and you put all these different periodicals, and so that when the story pops up, you can see the different stories that are written about the one topic. Mm-hmm. And then go and read them, and over time you will get a sense of, like, this is just more sound. Like, this is addressing something that is not being addressed in this thing. And that's basically it. Is like, you can see a lot of the news just sort of like skims on the top. And then as you start to get more granular with the news, you can start to see who is addressing these issues and who's just leaving them off because they're too complicated.
Sure. Do you have...
I know that's not satisfying.
Yeah, no, yeah, it sucks. I guess, like, everybody wants to hear, like, there's, like, the one media source that I can read that's, like, the paragon.
Newsweek!
Yeah, but it seems like, to echo what you're saying, like, you just have to consume a lot. That seems to be the case. And it seems like once you start to read, like, 3 or 4 articles on the same topic, hopefully you're kind of converging on having a somewhat accurate picture of what's actually happened, but there's no, like, shortcut. And then you can develop,
like, sources that you think are trustworthy. I like the Intercept. I think they do some very good work over at the Intercept. Mm-hmm. And... over a while, you just start reading individual writers or publications, and that's the whole point of these things. Is that once is to find people that you think you can trust.
Mm-hmm. I will say, in my own personal experience, the number one way to become more media savvy than 99% of Americans is to just read the article. Like, a lot of people seem to do headline skimming, or you'll go on Reddit and your way of getting the news is you read the Reddit post title and then you read the first comment, and that, like, fully informs your opinion. If you actually click through and just read the whole article, I think you're ahead of, like, the vast majority of people that talk about news on the internet, which is insane to me. Here's something. Tell me if my understanding of this is correct or not. You seem to be a SocDem, a social democrat. Is that true? Like, you're not a full-on socialist, or I'm not trying to, like, pigeonhole you in too much, but
yeah, I for the most part, I don't tend to label myself. I don't think I'm a full-on socialist. I'm not 100% sure I know what that means. Like, I am for nationalizing certain industries. Mm-hmm. And I am for more democracy in the context of our economy. Mm-hmm. I don't think that, I don't know where we have socialism per se, where there is no capitalism involved.
Sure.
Or no ownership of private property. I mean, I think that it's that some measure of tension is good, but I would go considerably further on the spectrum
than where
of
we
socialism than we are now.
For sure. Would it be fair to say that Michael is quite a bit more left than you?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay.
No, I mean I think I think he is. I don't know on what policy necessarily it would be. There may be a couple of industries that he would nationalize that I wouldn't, but I wouldn't know off the top of my head. Like Jamie on the show is much more, I think, to the left of where I am. Gotcha. I mean, she's a self-identified anarcho-communist, and I think some of that is. The anarcho part is a little bit fantastical.
Sure.
But regardless, the road to where she wants to go, or where Michael wants to go, or where I want to go is the same road. We may get off at a different exit.
Sure, a few stops down, but yeah.
Right, but I'm not. So, I look at things like libertarianism as a complete fantasy. And what's even more problematic about it is not just that it's fantastical, but heading down that road is a crap show every stop along the way.
Every single stop is so bad.
It's really worst until you get to the nirvana, which I don't think happens.
I guess, so my impression was that Michael was significantly left compared to you. Maybe not, maybe so. Do you ever feel like you have, when the way you read content online, like for fans that respond to you, or in dealing with other people on the show, do you feel like you have trouble with fans that are extremely left of you? Do you ever feel like there's like a tension there that you don't like? Or do you feel like it's just whatever, everybody kind of gets along and it's not a big deal, whether it's between you and your cast or you and your fans?
Look, I'm comfortable defending my position. I mean, the problems that I have with people online are not ideological. Like, to a certain extent, like, I've gone at it with Jimmy Dore. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all. He was on TYT, and he's spun off, and he has a YouTube show. And we got into a fight, basically, in the run-up to the 2016 election. And, I had seen something where he, on his show, at that time was on TYT, where he and his co-host at the time were talking like, Trump gets elected, big deal. If Peter Thiel becomes a Supreme Court justice, whatever. And I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And, just today, that the ruling
Supreme Court about
partisan gerrymandering. I mean, this was all completely predictable. In fact, you go back and you listen to that episode. I emailed him and I said, look, do you want to come on my show? Because I'm going to take that clip and I'm going to talk about how I think just completely wrongheaded it is. And he said, no, go ahead, go to town. And then he called in while I was doing it. And he basically, he's like, the Democrats, can stop, because he was very, very against Hillary. And, I was very supportive of Bernie in the primary, but he lost. And now it's like, I don't want the Supreme Court to go away for 40 years. And he didn't realize that you couldn't, that the reason why Garland was not seated had nothing to do with the filibuster, that the Republicans had controlled it. He said thinking that Mitch McConnell will get rid of the filibuster is just voting out of fear, and the moon could fall into the Lake Michigan, just bullshit like this. And for a long time, like a year after that, we basically railed on people like him as idiots. And there are people out there who confuse that with ideology, where they say, well, you just don't like because you're a neoliberal. And I'm like, there is not a single policy prescription that Jimmy Dore has that I don't have, and I may be to the left on some of his, but people confuse ideology with strategy. And performative things. Like voting to me is not performative. It is, you vote because you want to influence something, you have a tiny bit of influence and you want an outcome. it's not because you're making yourself feel good about yourself.
So this is something that actually we talk about this a lot about political effectiveness. Something that is kind of like, I guess, like an observation, not unique to me. Plenty of people make this, but like when you look at somebody like, say, the alt-right, like people that believe in the genetic superiority of some people or Jewish conspiracy theories, these people seem to welcome people like Donald Trump with open arms, who doesn't subscribe to any of their beliefs, really. Like we know this, right? Donald Trump is not by any stretch of the imagination alt-right, but he pushes the country kind of like in that direction. And it seems difficult sometimes on the left that it feels like if somebody isn't fully subscribed to your set of beliefs, that political effectiveness just gets thrown out the window. And it's like, well, I don't care about this if this isn't like 100% the thing that I agree with. I'm kind of curious in terms of, so like in a specific example of this is going back a little bit, but I always thought it was kind of weird. Maybe it had to happen, but Al Franken stepping down in an era when like the president, has grabbed him by the pussy, recorded on tape and doesn't care about it, when Kavanaugh is getting pushed through to the Supreme Court. And then you have Al Franken step down for, unless I missed it, I don't want to downplay anything, but it didn't seem like there were like pretty these extreme allegations of sexual assault that occur around other figures. What do you think about stuff like that? I guess the Al Franken thing in particular, and then the broader picture of that.
I mean, I should just preface by saying that, I'm a little bit friendly with Al, and knowing him from Air America, but my sense was that he felt pressure to go because of the Jones Moore campaign. And if that campaign was not, if that election was not happening, I imagine he would have stayed. And this completely, I've not had this conversation with him. I imagine he would have stayed for a hearing. That they would have done an investigation. I mean, I think that like he made a political calculation that for the sake of the Senate and getting that, winning that seat in Alabama, that it was important that he step down so that they could not. I think in that instance, yeah, I would have wanted him to have there to be an investigation, and specifically in that context. I don't know if I perceive that in the same way that you set up that analogy in terms of like purity. I think that like the Me Too thing, my sense is that just broadly speaking, big cultural change, I think very often has to overshoot. And there are going to be individuals who may get, who may, deal with some measure of unfairness. But I don't think that in the context of Me Too, like we can have an argument about Al Franken is like, was that a politically smart thing to do?
Yeah.
And that's a separate conversation. Then was that like the right thing?
For sure. Yeah.
Right thing to do. I think there's going to be some bounds that are overstepped, but I don't think there's anybody in the who got caught up in the Me Too thing and had to pay a price, who are really, as bad as that father and child who drowned in the Rio Grande. And so, but in terms of the Al Franken thing, I just don't think that's a great analogy for what you're talking about in terms of like, I'll give you an example.
Sure.
I think I am for single payer. I have always been for single payer. But I think that the left, some parts of the left, have made the mistake of making it about getting rid of private insurance. I think private insurance should become obsolete. But to lead with getting rid of private insurance does not make sense from a political standpoint. And in fact, Bernie's plan says that there will be a complementary role for private insurance. There is no place in the world where where rich people don't have the ability to go buy their own private supplemental insurance. I don't have a problem with that. Like, I want the ability for everybody to go at point of service to get free medical care. I want it to be eyes and also dental, psychological. We're going to have to pay more in taxes. And if people want to retain and pay extra for private insurance, God be with you. but there's just not enough that's going to implicate it if everybody is taxed for Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
And
do you have the same views with education as well? Just curious, do you think private schools should remain around?
I have no problem with the existence of private schools, but I have a problem with charters. Not all charters, but I think there should be no private charters. I think there should be no charters that don't have the same oversight or requirements of our public schools. They were developed initially to generate ideas, to be experimental labs, and they're being used too often as replacements for public school. So I don't mind private schools. People want to have private schools, but we should not be siphoning any money off of public education for them. So no vouchers, no charters that don't have extreme amount of oversight, and a limit on the charters.
And how do you feel about the way that we typically fund schools right now, based off of property tax?
Horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible.
For sure.
We should not be doing that. We should we should not be doing it on a state level. We should not be doing it. We should on federal level. I mean, personally, I would like to see far more funding for schools via either federal taxes or some type of federal mandate that it comes out of the state general fund as opposed to directly with property tax. It's really problematic.
I guess one other question I have is Democrats kind of get a little criticized for not going as far or playing as dirty as I guess Republicans would. Coming in, assuming that Democrats do take the next election, how far do you think they should go? Like, what limits should they test as far as things they can do? Like I know there's a lot of
or stuff
yeah,
like
exactly.
That, yeah.
Like, should they try and do stuff like literally with the Supreme Court adding more judge, or is that uncool and shouldn't go that far, or what?
I mean, I think they should definitely threaten to pack the court, and I think they should go through with that threat unless they get a different, like my preferred reform would be term limits on the court.
On the Supreme Court?
On the Supreme Court. And there was actually a proposal put forward by this writer called Matt Ford, I think it was in the New Republic, where he suggested having judges picked at random from the circuit courts. It's an interesting proposal. I think that something like that or term limits is better than packing the court, simply because the Republicans come in and pack it again.
Yeah.
And they will. But you put a term limit on there, I think that is very, very helpful.
That would have to be done via amendment, right? Or do you think that could be just done via legislation?
I can't remember actually if it's lifetime appointments to the Supreme Court. I think I don't know if you need to amend.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they changed that before in the past, and I don't think there was an amendment when they did it previously, right?
Well, they threatened.
They changed the number of judges, but
right, exactly.
not the length of the term. But yeah, if you have to do it as amendment, do it as an amendment. You know, that's why I would threaten to pack to essentially get enough people on board so that they settle on a. But yes, I would pack. I would.
But is Joe Biden really going to go through with that?
No, Joe Biden's useless. Joe Biden's useless, and I'll tell you something. If
you gotta be nice to the next Democratic nominee, all right?
Please. You asked me 4 months ago, is there a Democrat who could lose to Donald Trump? I would have said no. But I worry about Joe Biden.
Yeah, it's Hillary Clinton 2.0. Man, after seeing the stage, worse. After seeing the stage last night. And seeing like the amount of progressive ideas that were being pushed, I was really happy with Booker's performance. I like Warren. I think she's amazing. I think she did a really good job too. The idea of coming out of all of this with Biden as the nominee after what happened in 2016 would make me so incredibly disappointed. I don't even know if I have words for it. Jeez. I couldn't agree more. I would be more disappointed. I mean, I have more problems with Biden than I do, frankly, with Clinton. Mm-hmm. And although my prediction and, my predictions in the past have not been so great, particularly the recent past in terms of like general elections. But I would say, I think by early October, he is third in the polls.
Really?
Yeah.
And who do you predict is going to be in front?
I don't know. I mean, I think Warren and Bernie and I think Booker, Julian Castro could make a move. I think those were the ones that really sort of shone last night, and we'll see about tonight. But I just think that Joe Biden, people know him as the vice president, and a little bit of time on the campaign trail, and they'll remember him as the Joe Biden who was not vice president, and it's going to be a problem for him.
Hopefully. We can only pray.
No, there's a lot of people that just want to go back to normal and don't care about, progressive issues or anything. That's the majority of the people. That's the challenge, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. I just think that he is, I think it's going to become clear that he is not the shoo-in that people think he is. And that is, because so much of his support is a function of people thinking that he can definitely win more so than anybody else. Mm-hmm. Once that gets a little bit shaky, it gets a lot shaky.
Yeah.
Right? Because he does not have a big contingency of people who are excited about Joe Biden. And that is a problem in the general election.
In the general, yeah, but not a lot of people were excited about Hillary, and she made it through
Well, she lost.
Yeah, well, she lost the general, but yeah, which is hopefully what doesn't happen this time. Yeah,
that's my point. Yeah, and so you don't want, and frankly, John Kerry was that type of guy too. Mm-hmm. You don't want the guy who you think can win just because you think they can win, because that's not enough.
Well, the question, I guess, also is how just older Democrats are going to feel about someone like Bernie, who just see like a socialist and they don't like socialism type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of like one of the strengths that Elizabeth Warren has. I mean, there's a whole I don't know how this is going to break out. I don't. But I just think that Joe Biden never got anywhere in a primary, and if he wasn't sort of like appealing to racists, frankly, I don't think that Barack Obama would have felt it worthwhile to pick him.
Yeah. We can agree. If Biden wasn't Obama's VP, he would be nothing in this primary, right? That's like that holdover is like probably the biggest reason why he's popular now.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So all he needs then is Barack as his VP. That's legit, right? Like that seals it up, right? That's the done deal. You get Barack Obama as VP, and that is 100% clinched. Maybe, how Trump's not a smart man, and he's going out there, he's tweeting all this stuff about how he wants to run against Joe. Maybe he knows that Obama's coming in, and he's saying this trying to stop it originally. He's not smart enough to do.
Are you even legally allowed to do that? Can a president be a vice president in a future?
I think he could. I think theoretically he could. Yeah.
So much dumb stuff has happened over the past election seasons. I would be willing to bet you everything I own or could possibly own that's not going to happen. Yeah, I don't think Obama would be okay with that. Yeah.
I will say this: count how many times Joe Biden says Obama tonight.
Mm-hmm. Will it be more than Tulsi brought up her military record? That's the.
It will rival it.
Yeah. Okay.
I would not pick that in your bingo, your drinking game.
Yeah. Last question. Sorry, before he moves on, we have to ask this. If it does come down to Biden versus Trump, who are you voting for in that case?
I will vote for Biden.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, of course.
Good.
Okay, I got one final hard-hitting. Actually, I got one quick one and then another maybe quick one. The first quick one, are you in favor of, this is just things that my fan base harasses me over constantly. Do you think that we should totally and completely decommodify all housing? That nobody should be allowed to own private property like that? Do you have a strong opinion on that, or?
I don't think that we should decommodify housing. No.
Cool. All right.
I mean, I would.
Good take. You could just leave it there. That was the correct answer. We can move on to the next question. Thank you for setting the record straight. I appreciate that.
No, you can speak for a few seconds on it if you want.
I mean, I think that we should go further. I think we should undercut how much of a commodity it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we can do that with not giving preferential tax treatment to home mortgages.
For sure.
Yep.
I think that we can create more public housing and subsidized housing and have rent control and limit the amount of profiteering as it is.
Okay.
And I would also,
You had me until rent control. But...
Okay. Yeah. That's another topic for another day. My final super hard hitting question. Okay. I'm super curious what you think on this. Did Iran do it? Do you think?
Did they do the
limpet mines in the Gulf of Oman and everything? Do you think that they were involved in that, or do you think there's something more insidious going on? Or if you think it's too early to say, would you rather refrain from commenting?
I mean, let me put it this way. I'm very suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very suspicious.
Okay.
I'm very suspicious about it. You know that Norwegian tanker, apparently? I had a caller call in from Norway the other day.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a Norwegian tanker. The owner is a Norwegian who gave up his citizenship. But I think the boat itself is a Cypriot boat.
What does
It's
that
just
mean?
weird.
Wait, what does Cypriot mean?
Well, just from Cyprus. That it's not
gotcha. Okay.
necessarily a major NATO country.
Interesting.
You know, like I just find it hard to believe that Iran is going to attack a Japanese boat with the Japanese prime minister there. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. So, and I will say this, like I say, like, I don't know. I'm suspicious. People should be suspicious. There's a long history of this type of stuff being, BS, whether it comes from the U.S. government or others. I can tell you that the leader of Saudi Arabia ordered the killing and chopping up, apparently, of a guy with a U.S. green card, a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a lot of things where he would be like hesitant to do.
Sure.
Right? Like, so I don't know. But the Iran stuff is a disaster made by the president.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, that's the problem with electing a lunatic who is also going to hire other lunatics.
Okay. Well, hey, do you have any final words, or you can tell people where to find you, plug any projects you're doing?
Majority Report. That's about it.
Yeah.
But no, thanks for having me on. I'm a fan of yours at distance. Like, I'm with you. I don't get a chance to watch stuff, but like as I wade in, to like we are Twitch curious around here. And in fact, the first videos that we did were with Justin TV.
Oh, that's where I started streaming. Yeah, like 10 years ago.
I went down to Occupy, and we tried to do it via Justin TV.
Mm-hmm.
So this is it's exciting for me to meet you via Skype, and of course my must carries. I'm upping my must carry game too. So very excited to be here.
All right. Well, hey, if you guys need anything to help setting anything up or anything going on that, I had the largest Twitch stream last night covering the political stuff on Twitch with like 13,000 viewers, whatever. So just let me know if you'd help. Yeah, I'll definitely.
Yeah, we registered you the Majority Report Twitch handle because it was open and we thought someone would nab it during this call.
Did you really?
Yeah, so we got that for you.
Oh, good job,
thank
Dan.
you guys. I thought somebody here was supposed to do that.
Yeah. I think for what did we say we give it to him for? $10,000 or $15,000. I think the free market.
We'll talk about that. We'll get him back on for another show.
Negotiation. I understand.
Yeah, exactly.
I understand how this works.
We'll sell it off for content.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
All right. Have a good one, guys. See you later. Literally like 5 or 6 years ago, I want to say it was TSM that got caught doing these like 1 pixel embeds.